The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus said to his disciples, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy.' But I say to you, love your enemies, and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your heavenly Father. For he makes his sun rise on the bad and the good, and causes rain to fall on the just and the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what recompense will you have? Do not the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet your brothers only, what is unusual about that? Do not the pagans do the same? So be perfect, just as your heavenly Father is perfect." The Gospel of the Lord. So I want to sum up the little pericope we have from St. Paul's letter this morning in just one sentence. And Paul says, "You know, the churches in Macedonia gave a lot. You should give a lot too." That's basically what he's saying to the church in Corinth. So they were generous, you should be generous. Just as Jesus became poor for you, that you would be rich. So Paul is really using a great rhetorical power on the Corinthians, trying to convince them to be generous. And it's because in giving we receive. You know, even if God has all the money in the world, and he does, he gives us a little so that we can share. He gives us the capacity to give. And so that's what Paul is essentially telling the Corinthians, and he compares them to the Macedonians. Have you ever heard this expression, "Nothing unclean will enter heaven"? Nothing. This is from the book of Revelation. Nothing unclean will enter heaven. And when we think about perfection, we can think about perfection in like God is perfect. And then we can think about perfection in the sense of being finished, being a finished product. Okay? Like we have come to the end for which we were created. We are perfect. Perfected. Jesus says, "So be perfect just as your heavenly Father is perfect." How many times have I heard people say, "Well, God doesn't expect us to be perfect"? Does God expect us to be perfect or not? Nothing unclean will enter heaven. Now, we should be encouraged and consoled by that, because God is going to purify us to perfection. If we're going to heaven, we're going to be perfect. And Jesus says, "Be perfect just as your heavenly Father is perfect." And so we're on a journey now, aren't we? And we're striving for perfection. We're striving for purity. We're striving for holiness. And we need to take that call seriously. Now, I began the Mass this morning by thanking God for his mercy, because I'm not perfect. It will be an extension of God's mercy that purifies us in purgatory, if that's our destiny. And God in his mercy will cleanse us of the last vestiges of selfishness and sin and impurity. When Jesus is speaking to us in the Sermon on the Mount, we can throw up our hands and say, obviously he didn't mean any of that. It's too much, it's too hard. Or we can say, no, he's calling us to this, And we know we're going to fall short. So we throw ourselves on his mercy, and we beg him to lift us and to cleanse us and heal us. And that's where we should be. We have a tremendous tendency to compare ourselves to our neighbor and say, I'm better than them. And Jesus is saying, I don't care. Be perfect. I heard a reflection on the question Jesus was asked, will only a few be saved? And what was Jesus' response? Strive to enter the narrow way, because few find it. The road is narrow, the road to destruction is broad. And somebody reflecting on it said, what if he would have said 20%? And we'd all be wanting to be in the 20. We'd want people to be in the 80%. Say, let's make them worse, you know. That's not what he said. He said, strive to enter the narrow way. So are you striving? Be perfect as your Heavenly Father is perfect. Lord, have mercy. I got a long way to go. Lord, have mercy. And so we hear Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, and we are profoundly challenged by his call.